The village in it with a map and a plan. No place too tiny for this determined man. Crossing the counties one by one, he'll see in every English corner a bit of history.
Welcome back to Ribble Valley, everybody, for the 5th in the series. It's a Friday and that means it's the end of this current run. I will be back to Ribble Valley though at some point in the future. Now this one is a bit of a weird one because its name doesn't really tell you what's in this place, because for most of this walk, or part of this walk, I'll be heading outside the parish boundaries. It's very odd. This is Clayton le Dale. Clayton le Dale, clay farm in a valley. Wrapping up our first run in the Ribble Valley, we have a parish that's a bit of a weird one. Regular viewers know I don't say that without something to back it up, so consider this if you will. This is the parish of Clayton le Dale. It's predominantly an agricultural area to the north of Blackburn, with lots of scattered and isolated farms and farm buildings dotted across the landscape. The main centre of population is in the far eastern reaches, where a road runs north from Blackburn to meet the A59. On its route it passes through the village of Salesbury, where the Bishop of Blackburn currently resides. Salisbury is the main area of settlement within the parish, but here's the odd bit. Salisbury is also its own parish. It borders Clayton le Dale to the north and east, yet the main area of settlement in that one is Copster Green. So you can think of this one as kind of like a Salisbury preview. A lot of the things we'll cover here belong to the village but lie within Clayton le Dale. I told you it's weird. Salisbury will of course get its own episode eventually. As well as the Bishop's house, Salesbury has a lot more to speak of, including the Bonny Inn, a glorious church, a cricket club and the Memorial Hall, which stands in front of a football pitch used by Wilpshire Wanderers. Elsewhere in Clayton le Dale there's a lane that runs north towards the Ribble, taking in a glut of countryside as it makes its way towards the massively impressive Ribchester Bridge over the river itself. So for one final time, for now at least, in Ribble Valley, let's get our walking boots on and get learning. This will be one of the oddest walks we've ever attempted. I promise you we are in the parish of Clayton le Dale here, but most of this walk will feature things in Salesbury, which is yet to get its own episode. The boundary between the two slices straight through Salesbury village, leaving some bits within Clayton le Dale. One of them is the Bonny Inn. The Bonny Inn can trace its records back to 1822, when it was called either the Bonny Inn, as it is today, or the Sign of the Dog. The owner at that time was described as a weaver, but could dispense ale when he wasn't weaving. That sounds about right, lest we forget how much weaving usually earned people and how they had to make money in other ways. Like Parish, for example, yesterday. During the early days, the pub had two closes of land, suggesting it stood in a lonely lane. That lane was called Long Lane, but today we know it as the main Ribchester Road. It was totally surrounded by fields back then, a fact that's backed up even on maps of the area in 1900. It was acquired by Daniel Thwaites in 1864. So how about its name then? Well, it might have originated from the road that runs behind it. That's called Lovely Hall Lane. Lovely and bonny are similar words that both mean the same thing, so it's plausible that it came from there. Okay, so we've actually crossed the parish boundary here, which is weird when you think about all the major landmarks that are literally within touching distance of Clayton Ladale. We've got the school, which you can see over there. There's also the church, which is behind the camera, and there's also a cricket ground here too, all within, like I said, shouting distance of Clayton Ladale's boundary, but yet they don't belong to Clayton Ladale. It's weird, it's strange, but considering that they are so close, we are going to cover all of this as well. So let's head for the school. It's that building you can see in the far distance. If you head up Lovely Hall Lane, the next landmark greets you within a few short steps, and that would be Salesbury C of E Primary School. This is actually over the parish boundary. By going around the back of the pub, we've crossed into Salesbury proper. I told you, it's an odd setup. Nonetheless, let's discuss this school. The first school in Salesbury village was built in 1805 and was a small, primitive two-room structure built in the corner of the churchyard. The accommodation it provided and the education it offered was very rudimentary. In 1850, the first portion of the present school and the school house were started, but it would take 9 long years for them to be finally completed. This school was originally an L-shaped building consisting of 2 rooms, approximately 40 foot by 20, and separated by a stone wall with a communicating door. Climbing rose trees were trained to grow by the east window of the infants' room to give a colourful approach, and drinking water for the children was carried from the nearby Ben Well. At this time, there was no cloakroom with the children's coats and caps hung on hooks around the classroom walls. In the early 1880s, the dividing wall between the 2 rooms was partly removed and a revolving screen was introduced. Originally, the school had its own bell in a structure attached to the building, and when rung, it could be heard throughout the village and beyond. It later became unsafe, so it was removed and later lost. Apparently, in its early days, it was common for mice to sneak out from cracks in the walls here to investigate the contents of the school's dinner baskets. I would hope that doesn't happen now. With a few modern additions, Salesbury School is still going strong more than 160 years after it was first opened. Salisbury's church is almost dead opposite the school on the other side of Lovely Hall Lane. Again, we're still in Salesbury Parish, but we'll be crossing the border again shortly. Prior to 1807, the only places of worship in the village were a small private chapel at Salesbury Hall, a chapel or perhaps 2 at Sholey Hall, and possibly Lovely Hall. However, for most villagers there was a journey involved to either St Wilfrid's Church in Ribchester or St Mary's Church in Blackburn. In 1807, Salesbury finally gained its own. It was first run as a chapelry of Blackburn and was opened by the Bishop of Chester. This was because prior to 1847 the Diocese of Lichfield and then Chester covered the Salesbury and Wilpshire areas. This church, dedicated to St Peter, is not the one that was built in 1807. The original was called the Old White Church, and together with the original school cost £584 to build. It was located near the lower end of the present churchyard. It was a small, charming, rustic building. In time, the simplicity of the building became its downfall. It became dilapidated and was condemned in 1848, as it had been very poorly built and not very church-like. Despite its condition, it survived for another 40 years with no vicarage for its clergymen and was even propped up with timber supports. It was eventually replaced with this one, a larger, more robust effort that could seat up to 600 people. It was completed in 1887. The site for the new church had been donated by the Lord of Salesbury Manor, and the contract prior to its construction was for £3,350, with an extra £300 for drainage. The reason for that is because it was built over a former duck pond. In the days before the church, the perimeter of the duck pond was used as sort of a makeshift racetrack. Donkey and barrow races were organised by the Bonny Inn, with wagers on the outcomes, usually in pints of ale. It was common for people to drink excessively at these meetings, so one has to wonder how many unfortunate souls ended up in the pond. Just behind the church and its massive cemetery, you have the cricket ground, the local cricket ground here. Now there is a bit of a sporting theme in this episode. You'll see some football facilities later, but this is where the local cricket team play their games. And they've got a great view into the distance over there, haven't they? Look at that. Fantastic views into the hills over there. They've also got a decent view this way, to be honest with you. If you look over here, this is where we're going. We're going to cross this sort of barren wasteland, I suppose what it is. Well, this barren wasteland has got a name. It's also got a bit of history to it. So this is Hazel Moor, which is alternatively known as Salesbury Common or Hazelwood Common. This is exactly what it sounds like. It's common land. It's got a bit of history to it though. Both this and the duck pond, which the church is now built on, were part of Hazelwood, hence the name Hazel Moor. Measuring a good 20 acres, the land was cleared in order for the locals to graze cattle and share rights of way across it. Originally it had a stone wall boundary between it and Ribchester Road, which eventually fell into disrepair and was removed. These days, you can walk straight onto it. The common has been jealously and fiercely guarded over the years, and even now the locals still have the same rights to use it as they did when it was created. These rights are well recorded to ensure its protection to this day. We're now back over the boundary into Clayton-le-Dale, but it wouldn't have made any sense to not cover those areas here, given that the rest of Salesbury Parish focuses more on Copster Green. In a way, the mess that the current boundaries are shouldn't be all that surprising. Salesbury, Wilpshire and Clayton-le-Dale are often written and spoken about in the same context. The three have been historically linked together for centuries. Many people describe the three as the window into the Ribble Valley. I like that name. The boundaries of these three areas have changed so many times, but they all originate from being one single manor. The ancient manor of Salesbury included both Wilpshire and Clayton-le-Dale and was controlled by the powerful Salesbury family, who were the lords of the manor. They resided at Salesbury Hall and later Lovely Hall. All three were small farming settlements, but they all had a hand in the hand-loom weaving industry too. Most of the farms around here were dairies due to the climate and the landscape, but there were a small amount that kept sheep and poultry too. Most of the hand-loom weavers' cottages in Salesbury formed a triangular plot above the school and opposite the new church at the junction of Lovely Hall Lane and Ribchester Road. During the years that have passed since those times, the most significant change to the area has been the increase in housing, especially along Ribchester Road itself. Once little more than a barren nothingness with the odd building here and there, the western side of Ribchester Road now fronts a huge housing estate, and the road itself has a whole series of semi-detached houses and bungalows built in the 1930s, 40s and beyond. Significantly, this lateral growth along existing roads indicated the growth of the motor car in the area from the 1920s onwards, as former tracks were upgraded to at least minor road status. This was to cope with the increased movement of people as commuting to work in nearby towns became commonplace. Lots of rural farmland was also lost. As more and more people moved out of industrial Blackburn, this part of Salesbury continued to grow. Old OS maps label these areas as Clayton Lodge, Clayton Manor and Clayton Grange. Modern maps don't, which is proof positive how historic areas can be lost under new developments. It's definitely the hardest part of the route, this. There's some hills involved. This is, I think it's Beach Close, I think the name of this street is. If you walk up this, I'm about halfway up. Look at this. Beautiful view into the valley down there. Whew, there's lots of those around here. Let's continue. Might see some more. Something else that's marked on old OS maps is an area called Hazeldene, but that name lives on thanks to this building. Sited within all these modern 20th century residences is Hazeldene Care Home. A 59-bed care home, Hazeldene has an excellent reputation and specialises in residential, dementia and respite care. It's a quirky, homely building with extensive communal areas. Residents here are often taken on day trips. One that's always a winner is to Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I guess being this close to the west coast has its advantages. Now we come to Salesbury's War Memorial Hall, located almost opposite the Bonny Inn. The foundation stone for the hall was laid in 1927 by the Bishop of Blackburn. It was built to honour the local men who died in World War I. Today, this is a very well-used community centre. The hall has a large assembly room, a kitchen, a cloakroom and a secretary's office on the ground floor. The large room upstairs would develop into a billiards room. In later years, on land surrounding the hall, playing fields were developed for local children, along with a tennis court, a bowling green and a clubhouse. A car park was later developed to complete these excellent facilities, which are all still used extensively. The football pitch is used by Wilpshire Wanderers for their various youth sides. The ground was opened in 2002 by the former Blackburn Rovers and England favourite Ronnie CLAYTON. He was also the honorary president of Wilpshire Wanderers until he died in 2010. Wilpshire Wanderers were formed in 1997. They were created thanks to the demise of a former local side, Salesbury Cubs. Members of that former team were looking to continue playing football by perhaps joining local sides like Langho FC or Lammock FC. None, though, were able to find a place in their squads. So instead, a new team was formed, Wilpshire Wanderers. Unlike the other local clubs, they didn't have a ground. For a time, they used a little park at the bottom of Durham Road, but it was only ever a makeshift setup. In 1999, Wilpshire Wanderers secured funding to convert the grassland at the side of Salesbury Memorial Hall into 2 football pitches. Drainage work commenced in 2000, which even saw their volunteer coaches crawling across the pitch on their hands and knees, picking out stones prior to the grass seeding. That's commitment for you. It was worth all the effort in the end, because now Wilpshire Wanderers have one of the best football facilities in the north of Blackburn. And we've got a little job to do before we leave Salesbury Memorial Hall behind, and that's leave one of these on the notice board to mark that I've been to the parish of, not Salesbury, but Clayton Ledale. I will make another... Oh, that fell off. Hang on, let me just pick it up again. The wind is terrible right now. Put it up there. There we go. So yeah, I will make a video for Salesbury at some point in the future, but not right now because this is the last in the run. So I'll be heading away from here when I'm done with this episode, which I nearly am. I'm nearly done with the parish of Clayton Ledale. From the Memorial Hall, we're going to head out here and take a left turn, and then basically my car is parked in the next street over to the left. And then we're going to drive along Ribchester Road. It'll take us past an important house, which is the home of someone in the clergy. Leaving the village to the north, there's one last thing we have to check out before we can go driving around properly. That would be the Bishop of Blackburn's house. For several years now, the bishop has lived in Salesbury. In a way, it's sort of odd that Blackburn even has a bishop, by the way, because, well, it's not a city. Despite that fact, the Bishop of Blackburn's office has existed since the foundation of the see from part of the Diocese of Manchester in 1926. The current bishop is Philip North, who was elected in April 2023. Driving north out of the village, you'd perhaps struggle to know his house was even here. The only clue is a small sign on the roadside that simply says Bishop of Blackburn. It's nothing like the palace his counterpart in York has. If you want to see that, you should check out my Bishopthorpe episode from a few years ago. This next section is a drive along the A59 and back. The A59 cuts across the parish on its route between Preston and Clitheroe, acting as a bypass for the northern suburbs of Blackburn. It's alternatively known as Longsight Road here. There are several businesses along the A59 at this point. These include an Indian restaurant, a couple of caravan parks, and even a veterinary surgery. Perhaps the most well known along here though is Mrs Dowson's Farm Park. Dowsons was originally a dairy, like many of the farms in and around Salesbury. From 2001 onwards they started making ice cream and supplying both Asda and Booth's supermarkets. They made some unusual flavours in the process, including the rather ambitious sounding black pudding flavour. Well, I guess this is Lancashire after all. The farm is passionate, not only about ice cream, but also about giving children, and adults alike, the opportunity to see, touch and even handle their animals. The park has been built with one special feature in mind, that it's safe and enjoyable for all. As a busy working farm with over 200 cows and land that stretches to some 350 acres, some parts are closed to public access, but it's still an enjoyable family day out, if you like this sort of thing. Lastly, we have one final piece of driving to do. CLAYTON Parish extends as far north as the River Ribble. North of the A59, Ribchester Road becomes a narrow, winding lane that runs all the way to the river. To get over it, you have to use the ancient Ribchester Bridge. Well, driving up the road between the A59 and Ribchester, you see this thing in the distance as you approach it, and my God, does it look massive. That's Ribchester Bridge, people. Absolutely wonderful structure, and it marks the boundary here, does the River Ribble, between CLAYTON and Ribchester. Let's talk a bit about the bridge and a bit about the river as well, because we haven't yet seen the Ribble, have we? Ribchester Bridge is a toll-free 3-span bridge. It's a Grade 2 listed structure located about 3/4 of a mile east of the village of the same name. Despite the fact it's called Ribchester Bridge, it actually crosses the river between the parishes of CLAYTON and Dutton. It carries the B6245. Thought to have been constructed in 1774, it's built of sandstone and has an overall length of 71.8 metres. It's 6.8 metres wide. This point on the river has been an important crossing for millennia and once had a Roman fort here positioned nearby to guard it. There was almost certainly a bridge that existed before this one, but the origin of any before the current bridge's predecessor, constructed in 1669, is not known. Despite that, there exists a charter dated 1354 which gave permission for the building of a bridge of wood or stone across the river at a place called Maidenford. It also granted some land for the use of a ferryman, but this was possibly considerably downstream, near Osbaldeston Hall. There was, after all, a ferry crossing there until the mid-19th century. With CLAYTON behind us, we are done with this first initial run in Ribble Valley, and what a journey it's been so far. Roman signal stations, old airfields, hand loom weavers with a second job. It's been fun so far, hasn't it? As ever, I can't wait to come back, but Lancashire folk don't have to wait that long to see more of their county on TVI. This weekend we're staying in the northwest. Join me tomorrow as we take on the first of a run of 4 in Pendle, where we'll learn a thing or two about witchcraft. Now, just before I go, remember, this video is part of a huge project to visit every civil parish in England. That's more than 10,000. These routes are pre-planned, and due to time constraints, I can't cover every detail or walk down every street. Please don't complain if this video missed something out. I pronounce names how I choose to. I am very aware that local dialect may vary, and I don't take kindly to criticism about this. You've been warned. It's impossible to know everything too. If this video was terrible, make your own. If you're a regular watcher of The Village Idiot, you're not the only one. If you've got a small business, why not use my videos to advertise it? Leave a comment below if you're interested. And finally, thanks for watching this episode, everybody. Give us a like and a subscribe if you've enjoyed this episode, and share it with your friends and relatives. It all helps to keep this mission going. Until next time, I've been Andy, also known as The Village Idiot, and I'm out.